Good morning. I was, like many of you, staying at the hotel now, and I looked out the window and, of course, had this great view of the bay. And it occurred to me that looking at the bay, really, I had no idea whether there's any fish in there at all, whether the bottom is healthy community or whether the bottom is just toxic mud, or anything about what goes on below the surface. And of course, as you heard yesterday, the ocean covers 3/4 of the planet, and the reality is we barely know what's going on below the surface. Now, a few people do. Sylvia knows what's going on below the surface. But the vast majority of Americans, the vast majority of people around the planet, look out and don't have a clue what goes on underneath that surface. And that really is the biggest challenge we face. We'll be talking about specific challenges: overfishing, pollution, global warming. But the big challenge is that people can't see, don't know what goes on underneath. And as a result, we have these problems that aren't getting solved. So today I'm going to, a little bit of a bad news, good news story, that we have problems, but we also have some solutions on the way. You've heard of some this morning about how you order your food at restaurants and what you eat, but there's also some collective actions we can take. But let me first just put this in a bit of a perspective. Of course, you've heard how important the oceans are. Millions of people rely on the ocean for food, for tourism. In the U.S., the oceans provide more economic stimulus to the economy than the entire farm sector, $230 billion. Now, today, $1 billion isn't much money, so think of it in a different way. There was a study that looked at the services that nature provided to all of humanity. And that study came out with the figure of $33 trillion per year, vastly more than the entire world economy. Most of that comes from the oceans, regulating our climate, providing us the oxygen that we breathe. So think about that. For free, the oceans are providing more to our economy, not just to our psyche, than the entire world economy. And that is what is at stake here. So what are the problems facing the oceans? We heard a lot this morning about overfishing. You also probably know about pollution, tremendous sources of pollution. For so long, the oceans are a dumping ground. Nutrient pollution from excess fertilizer flows down the rivers and creates these dead zones where virtually nothing can grow. Near the Gulf of Mexico, where the Mississippi River comes out. I'm from New York. Western Long Island Sound is largely a dead zone. Fish that can swim away, but those fish that crawl, like lobsters, can't get away and die at the bottom of the Long Island Sound. Polar bears. NRDC does a lot to protect polar bears. Polar bears have tremendous toxic chemicals in their blubber, in their bodies. Where do they get it? Well, they eat seals. Seals eat fish. Fish absorb it from all the oceans. So far away, polar bears, which live in remote parts of the earth, because they are connected through the oceans, through our food and chain in the oceans, are heavily contaminated. And now we have two new threats that we're beginning to know a lot more about: global warming and its related threat of ocean acidification. Warming, you heard earlier, we used to think that it was great that part of the carbon dioxide that we spew out from the burning of fossil fuels, coal-fired power plants all around the country, oil plants all around the country, billions of cars all around the world. All of that produces carbon dioxide. Much of it goes into the atmosphere, and it acts like a blanket, like a greenhouse, like that glass in a greenhouse, and is truly heating the planet. It's no longer a question of theory, it's a question of fact. The data is there. The world is getting warmer. As the world gets warmer, the oceans get warmer. And that affects, for example, the corals and the fish that are out there. Now, I remember about 10 years ago, we used to think, phew, the oceans are absorbing some of that carbon dioxide, so it's not all going into the atmosphere and warming up the planet. Well, it turns out that that carbon dioxide, as it gets absorbed into the ocean, creates an acid, carbonic acid, which is changing the very chemistry of the oceans. And of course, we live and breathe the air. All the creatures in the ocean live in and depend upon the chemistry of the oceans. So as this chemistry changes, it is changing the entire ocean food web. You heard Sylvia talk earlier about the food chain going up. All the teeny little creatures, whether they be corals or the shellfish, that depends on calcium in the water and other minerals to be able to create their shells that protect them, that is being made much more difficult, and they're having much more trouble surviving, and often their shells are dissolving. Right now, the oceans are 30% more acidic than they were only 100 years ago. And at the rate we're going, by the end of the century, the oceans will be more acidic than they've been in 20 million years. So in 100 years, we create a bigger change in the chemistry of the oceans than has been around for 20 million years. So that is what is happening, and if you take all of this together, the overfishing, the pollution, the warming, the acidification, it's like kicking a guy when he's down. The fish stocks that might be able to respond to one of these threats are having extraordinary difficulty responding to all these threats together. I do point out in your goodie bag that I think you're getting at lunch, you'll see there will be there a DVD of a movie called Acid Test that NRDC put out, and the Discovery Channel is running on nationwide TV, that talks much more about ocean acidification. And I really urge you to look at that, as with all these other terrific DVDs and movies that you've seen. It's a very compelling story about a frightening situation. The good news, however, of this story is that we have some real opportunity for progress. In June, the House of Representatives passed a bill to put limits on carbon dioxide pollution and to move us to a clean energy future. And we are hopeful that the Senate will pass a bill. We hope it will strengthen the bill, actually, and pass a bill. President Obama has been very supportive of it, so we know if it gets to his desk, he'll sign it. And this would be an enormous step forward in regulating and protecting the oceans. But I emphasize it is a tough battle to get it through the Senate. So you will also get, when you come back from lunch at every one of the places where you're sitting, a letter that you, I hope, will consider signing and send to your senators, and in every other way to contact your senators or anyone else, particularly if you have friends who live in swing states, you know, those Midwestern states, or the southern states where you can get those senators to tell them that you really want action. What will this bill do? As I said, for the very first time, it will put a limit on carbon pollution, limit carbon dioxide pollution by about 17% by 2020 and by 80% by 2050, which are numbers that the world scientists are hopeful, I can't say certain by any stretch, but are hopeful will make a real dent in global warming and ocean acidification. How will it do that? It will not only put a limit on carbon dioxide, but it will help us move forward to a clean energy future, rather than a future that depends on burning rocks the way we did 200 years ago to create our electricity, getting our electricity from the wind, from the sun, from oceans, from tides, from the very heat of the earth. All of these ways are possible to get energy, to get electricity, to live a good life without destroying the planet we live on. How about moving around? Right now, driving cars and trucks is responsible for about a third of our global warming pollution. We can move to much more efficient vehicles. I'm sure many of you know the difference between a Hummer and a Prius. Well, a Prius is just the beginning. We can go much further, and with efforts that President Obama signed a couple months ago, and with where we can go in the future, we can be moving to much, much cleaner electric cars, much more mass transit, communities where you can live and walk around. We can move also to changing how we design our communities so we don't need to burn fossil fuels just to live day by day. Another big factor in global warming pollution is the destruction of the world's forests. You heard earlier Sylvia thinking about how the oceans in some ways are storing carbon dioxide like forests. Our forests are the lungs of our planet. The vast tropical forest in Brazil and Indonesia, the vast boreal forest in Siberia and Canada are huge reservoirs that protect us from this global warming pollution. And those are being cut down at a ferocious rate. So part of what this climate bill provides is incentives really for the U.S. to not only protect its own forests, but to help other countries in developing countries protect their forests. So there's a tremendous opportunity, if we get this bill through the Senate, to make a difference, not only in what you eat when you go to a restaurant or when you're at home, but by acting together. If we can get this bill through the Senate and get it through, become law, it will then become a model. It would catapult the United States from being, but frankly, we've been one of the worst countries in terms of global warming for a long time, to one of the best. There will be an international conference in Copenhagen at the end of this year, and for the United States to go there as a leader with taking action will really change the entire world dynamic. If we get this bill through the US Congress, it won't only change what happens in the US, it will change what happens in the world. So I really do encourage you to look at that. And I'll say one last thing. In addition to these threats of the ocean, we have a problem that the oceans are now in the United States governed by this complete mess of statutes. It's like a bowl of spaghetti where you have over 100 different laws that affect the oceans, dozens of different agencies that each have a little something to say about the ocean. And as a result, as you know, when it's any situation like that, not much happens. So we are very excited that President Obama has created an ocean task force, following up on earlier task force, to try to re-examine this ocean governance. So again, not only do we have an opportunity to address global warming that we haven't had in decades, we have an opportunity that we haven't had in decades to create a structure to create some sensible system of thinking about the oceans, of using the oceans, of taking best advantage, and most importantly, protecting the oceans. So this is, although you're hearing a lot today about overfishing, about pollution, about global warming, really this is our moment. We have chances we haven't had in decades, but those chances are only going to happen if every one of us here takes action, and every one of us here goes and hounds all of our friends to take action, because it's a real uphill battle to get these through the Congress and into reality, but we can do it. So we look forward to working together. Thank you.